Fleet Master Cavan Vale was laughing when the order went out, and that was the part Oru Satai would remember for the rest of his short, ruined life. They stood on the command deck of the Dominion flagship, looking down through the observation blister at a field of dead ships. The humans had left them there, row on row of gray hulls, cold and unlit, drifting in slow formation across a stretch of empty space the Dravel charts called Sable Reach. Some of the hulls were longer than a city. None of them had moved in 300 years. "Look at it," Vale said. "A graveyard. And they think it frightens us." Setai did not laugh. He was a sentinel keeper, which meant his work was the cataloging of derelict things. And he had read the old files. He knew the humans had a name for this field. He knew the word did not translate to graveyard. "Fleet Master," he began. "Pick one," Vale said, still smiling. "A big one. We will open it like a shell and show the council what human iron is worth." Below them, a targeting frame settled over the largest of the dark hulls, and far away on a station the humans called Meridian, a woman was about to lose everything she had built. Her name was Amara Reyes. She was 51 years old, and she had spent 30 of those years cataloging the very ships Vale was laughing at. Meridian Station was her archive. It held the maintenance logs, the crew rosters, the burial records, the long, slow history of a fleet that everyone but her believed was dead. Her daughter Ren was 19 and had come to the station that week to help her mother finish the last of the sorting. There was a pen on Amara's desk that she had carried up from Earth, an old thing refilled 100 times. She liked to say it had written more of human history than she had. The Dominion did not know any of this. To them, Meridian was a soft target near the boneyard, and destroying it would prove a point. Cavan Vale gave the order the way another man might swat an insect, without looking already, thinking about the next thing. "Reduce the station," he said. "Then take the archive world. If they want their history, let them come and ask for it." Setai felt the deck shift as the flagship's forward batteries came around. He wanted to say that this was a mistake. He was a keeper of records, not a warrior, and something in the old files had frightened him for years, without his ever being able to say why. But First Speaker Talasan had already approved the operation from the capital, and there is no argument a clerk can win against a fleet. So Meridian burned. It was not a long thing to watch. The station came apart in the clean, silent way stations do, and the people inside it were taken or scattered, and the archive that held 30 years of one woman's belief went dark. Amara Reyes was pulled from the wreck alive, which the Dominion counted as mercy, and later learned was not. Ren was left at the docking spar waiting for a mother who did not come back through the airlock. The Dominion recorded the operation as a success and moved on within the hour. Vale turned back to the boneyard. "Now," he said, "the graveyard." Setai returned to his station and did the only thing a keeper knows how to do when he is afraid. He opened the files. He found the human designations for the field, and he began to read them into the record one after another, because reading a thing aloud was how his kind made it real. And as he read, he started without deciding to count. He was a keeper. Counting was what his hands did when his mind would not sit still. The first thing he counted was a light on the largest of the dark hulls, the one Vale had marked for the demonstration. A single running light had come on. Just one. A small amber point, in all that cold gray, no brighter than a candle across a hall. Fleet Master Setai said, "One of them is lit." Vale did not turn. A short in a dead ship. "They rot. Let it burn out." Setai kept his eyes on the light. It did not burn out. Across an unimaginable distance in a room the Dominion would not see for some time. Yet a woman named Nadia Cole read the same event from the other side. Captain Cole commanded the ship. The humans called the Steadfast the very hull Vale had chosen to break. She was not aboard it. No one had been aboard it for 300 years. She sat in a quiet operations room on a station many light years away, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching a single amber indicator resolve on her board. She did not stand up. She did not raise her voice. She reached over and touched a line on a display that had not needed touching in her lifetime or her grandmother's. "Meridian's gone," she said to the room. "They burned the archive." Beside her stood Admiral Elias Hart, an old man with a flat, unhurried voice. He looked at the amber light on the board the way you look at a kettle that has finally started to sing. Then they've made the choice, Hart said. Wake her up. All the way, one light for now, Hart said. Let them see it. Let them wonder about it. We are in no hurry. That was the thing the Dominion never understood about the humans. And it is worth pausing to say plainly, because a listener drifting off should not miss it. The Dravel measured strength by motion. A fleet that moved was alive. A fleet that sat still was finished. The humans did not think that way at all. To the humans, a thing that sat still for 300 years and was still ready to move at the end of it was not weak. It was the most dangerous thing they knew how to build. Nadia Cole finished her cold coffee. She sent a single instruction across the dark and far away, on a dead hull, inside a graveyard. One amber light burned a little steadier. On the flagship, Setai counted again. Fleetmaster, there are more. Now Vale turned. Below them, where a moment ago there had been one light, there were 9 small amber points scattered across the field, coming up out of the gray, like eyes opening in a dark room. One light, then 9, Setai said quietly, mostly to himself. He wrote the count into the record. His hands were not entirely steady. Vale watched the lights for a long moment. Something moved behind his face, some small animal instinct that his pride reached down and strangled before it could speak. He straightened. He smiled again because a fleetmaster does not let a clerk see him flinch. 9 failing power cells. In a dead fleet, he said. It hasn't moved in 300 years. It is not going to move now. He said it the way men say things. They have decided to believe. He would say it again in the days to come. And each time he said it, the words would cost him more, though he did not know that yet. Setai looked from the 9 lights to the old file open on his station, to the human word he had not yet dared to read aloud. He read it now under his breath, and it did not mean graveyard, and it did not mean rest. The word was watch. Below them, a 10th light came on, and somewhere behind all that quiet gray iron in a hull, the Dominion had marked for target practice, a thing that had been asked to wait for 300 years, began without hurry and without noise, to remember exactly what it had been built to do. The 10th light became the 11th before Setai finished writing down the 10th. He sat very still at his station and let the count run through his hands. It was a small thing to do, and it steadied him, the way a man walking through a dark house will trail his fingers along the wall. 11 amber points, now scattered across the field, with no pattern. He could name coming up 1 and 2 at a time. Out of 300 years of cold, he had catalogued 1,000 dead fleets in his life. Dead fleets did not do this. Dead fleets stayed dead. That was the entire meaning of the word. He requested a wider scan and fed it to the record, and watched the number climb while he watched it. 11, then 14, then, over the space of an hour, a slow and patient 19. Sentinel Keeper. First speaker Talison's voice came down the command channel from the Capitol dry and unbothered. You are flooding the council record with light readings. Explain yourself. First speaker. The derelict field in Sable Reach is coming online. 19 hulls are showing active power. The number is rising. There was a pause. Setai could picture the council chamber, the tears of Dravel elders, the great slow certainty of them. Derelicts leak power as they decay. On said, you are a keeper of dead things, and you have mistaken rot for life. It is an understandable error, given your temperament. Log it, and stop alarming the fleet. With respect, first speaker. The readings are not decay. They are startup sequences. They are ordered. Something is bringing them up, one at a time, deliberately. And it is being careful, on repeated. And there was the faintest amusement in it. A dead fleet is being careful. Keeper go and rest. Fleetmaster Vale has the matter in hand. The channel closed. Setai sat with the word careful in his mouth and did not feel rested at all. Far away in the quiet operations room, Nadia Cole was being careful exactly as accused. She brought the ships up the way you wake a sleeping house, one lamp at a time, checking each system as it came. It would have been faster to throw the whole field online at once. She did not. There was no reason to hurry, and every reason to let the Dominion sit with what they were seeing and draw the wrong conclusions from it for as long as possible. A frightened enemy that thinks it understands you is worth more than a dead one. Her grandmother had written that in the watch log, in a hand that had been dust for a century, and Nadia had read it enough times to believe it in her own bones. Admiral Hart came in with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without a word. He had a way of arriving in a room that made the room quieter. 19 up, she said. They're calling it decay. Of course they are. Hart lowered himself into the chair across from her. Slow with age. They've spent 300 years telling each other. Those ships are corpses. It's a comfortable thing to believe. Comfortable things are hard to put down. They burned Meridian. To prove it. I know. Something passed over the old man's face there and gone. Amara's people. Some got clear. She didn't. Nadia turned her cup in her hands. They have her. Her daughter was on the docking spar. She's still there, apparently. Won't leave. Hart was quiet a moment. Then we will get her mother back, he said. And there was nothing dramatic in it. He said it the way he might have said the coffee was hot. It landed harder for that. But not fast. Fast is how you drop things. Bring the fleet up slow, Captain. Let them keep laughing a while longer. It costs us nothing, and it is the last easy thing they will ever get to do. That was the whole trouble with the humans, and it bears saying flatly, because it is the hinge the entire story turns on. The Drevel had never once in their history built a thing and then walked away and trusted it to still be ready 3 centuries later. They could not imagine a patience that long, and because they could not imagine it, they could not defend against it. You cannot guard against a door you refuse to believe exists. On the flagship, Vale had stopped smiling, though he would not yet admit that either. He had ordered the fleet to close distance on the field. It was the correct aggressive move, and it felt, when he gave it, like taking control of the situation. Ships turned, engines lit. The Dominion Armada, 6,000 strong, and proud of it, slid forward through the dark, toward a graveyard that would not stop lighting lamps. 19 dead ships showing shorts. Vale told his deck officers loudly enough that the record would carry it. It has not moved in 300 years. We will get in close, put around, through the largest one, and end this ghost story. Setai heard the line, and without meaning to wrote it into the record too. It hasn't moved in 300 years. It was the 4th time the fleet master had said some version of it. Setai found he had started counting those as well, the way you count anything you are afraid of, and he did not like what the number was doing. The Armada crossed the outer marker of Sable Reach, and the field answered. It did not fire. It did not surge. It did something quieter and far worse. Along one entire flank of the boneyard in a single unhurried breath, an entire row of running lights came on at once, not 1 and 2 at a time. Now, 40 of them together, in a line that ran longer than the eye could hold, amber points blooming down the dark, like a coastline seen from orbit at night. The command deck went silent. Setai stopped writing. His hand simply stopped the count frozen, at the number he had been about to record, because the count had ceased to mean anything. You count things that come one at a time. You do not count the tide. 40, he said anyway, because he did not know what else to do with his voice. Fleetmaster, 40 of them all at once. They lit them together. They wanted us to see them do it. Vale stared through the blister at the long, bright line of the enemy dead, and for one moment, one single moment, the thing behind his face got loose. It showed. Every officer on the deck saw it, and would remember seeing it. Then, his pride came down over it, like a shudder. Then we have found their failing sector, he said. His voice was steady. His voice was a decision. 40 ghosts in a row. It changes nothing. It has not moved in 300 years. And lights are not guns. Across the dark in the quiet room, an indicator on Nadia Cole's board turned from amber to a soft waiting white. She looked at it for a long time. Then she keyed the channel that had lain silent since before her mother was born, and she spoke into it, calm and clear, the first human words the Dominion fleet would ever hear. Drevel Command, This is the steadfast, a pause, unhurried, almost kind. You are standing in a place we asked you not to stand. We are going to ask you once more. On the flagship, 6,000 ships strong, in a fleet that had never lost, Fleetmaster Cavan Vale heard a dead ship speak and said nothing at all. And behind him, unnoticed, Sentinel Keeper Orusetai quietly closed the count in the record, and under it wrote a single line from the old human file, the line he had been afraid of for years, without knowing why. It hasn't moved in 300 years, because it was never told to. It was only ever told to wait. The humans asked once more, and the Dominion answered with a gun. It was Vale's decision, and it was on paper the right one. You do not let a derelict speak to your fleet, as though the two of you were equals. You do not let 6,000 ships watch their fleetmaster be lectured by a corpse. So he gave the order. He had come here to give the demonstration the round through the largest hall, and he gave it fast, before the strange white patience of that voice could work any further into his crews. The steadfast, he said, the one that spoke, break it. Now, a single lance battery on the flagship's forward line came around and fired. It was a good shot, clean the kind of shot. The Dominion had ended 100 smaller wars with it. Crossed the dark and struck the steadfast full along the flank, and the old gray hull took it, and a section of plating the size of a district came apart and went spinning off into the black. On the command deck, someone let out a breath. There, a dead thing hit, hurt like a dead thing. The universe made sense again. Seta did not breathe out. Setai was watching the wound. The plating that had spun free was already being replaced, not repaired, not welded, not the slow limping patchwork of a crew fighting to save a ship. Replaced. From somewhere deep inside the hull, new material was moving out to the breach in a smooth, unhurried flow, closing it the way water closes over a dropped stone, and where the wound had been there was simply hull again, unmarked as if the shot had been a thought the ship had chosen to forget. It's healing, Setai said. His voice had gone thin. Fleetmaster, the shot did not slow it. It is closing the breach faster than we opened it. Automated damage control. Vale did not turn from the blister. The old warships had it. It is a machine sealing a hole. It is not a miracle. It is not sealing the hole. First speaker. It is remaking the hull. It is a better hull now than before we fired. Setai heard his own words and wished he could take them back into somewhere quieter. We did not damage it. We taught it what our lance does, and it adjusted. That is the thing that ought to be said slowly, because it is the true shape of the human threat, and every listener half asleep should carry it out of this story, if they carry nothing else. The Dominion had come expecting a weapon, a hidden gun, a secret shield, some single terrible device they could name, and having named it, learn to fear in a manageable way. There was no such device. What the humans had built into their dead fleet was not a weapon at all. It was the habit of getting better. Hit it once, and it learned the shape of your hand. Hit it twice, and it had already changed, so that your hand no longer fit. You could not outshoot a thing like that. You could only teach it, with every shot, how to end you a little more efficiently. In the quiet operations room, Nadia Cole watched the same event and made a small note in the watch log, the way a woman might note the weather. They fired, she said. Forward lance. Single round. The steadfast logged the yield and adapted the flank. Admiral Hart nodded slowly. How's she taking it? Like she was built to. Nadia almost smiled and did not bring up the reserve line. 40 was to make them look. Give them the next number to think about. How many? 206, she said. Let's see what they call that. Hart looked at the board, at the long field of gray and amber, at the ships his people had put to sleep in another century, with the promise that someone would keep the watch. 206, he said. My grandfather woke 30 of these once at Corin, and the war was over by morning. They never even reached the third number. He set down his cup. Bring them up, Captain. Slow. Let the fleetmaster keep his line a little longer. Across the dark the field lit again. It came the way a city comes up at dusk. Not all at once, and not in rows now, but in a great spreading tide of amber that ran out across the boneyard until the Count Setai had been keeping simply dissolved. He did not try to number them. He knew watching that the humans had let him count, The first ones, on purpose, had given him small numbers to hold, so that this larger silence would land the harder 1, then 9, then 40, and now a field of light too wide to hold in the eye, and somewhere in the record, a running total. He no longer had the courage to up 200, he said. And then, because the humans had opened a channel and let the number speak for itself, he heard the flat human voice. Give it to him precisely. Drevel command, said the Steadfast. You are looking at 206 of them. You asked how many ships we have. That was never the question you should have been asking. Vale's jaw was tight now. The animal behind his face had stopped struggling. It had simply gone still, the way small things go. Still when something large has entered the room. But his pride was a discipline of centuries, and it held 206 lit derelicts, he said, and his voice did not shake. And every officer on the deck heard the effort it took to keep it from shaking. It has not moved in 300 years. Lights are not motion. Healing is not motion. Until one of those ships moves, we hold the field. He believed it. That was the terrible part. He had said the line so many times now that it had become a wall. He had built around himself, brick by brick, and he stood behind it, and was almost comforted. Setai heard the line the 5th time, the 6th. He had lost his own count of the countings, and he turned away from the blister and back to the old human file, because he could not bear the lights any longer, and the words were quieter. He had been afraid of the word watch since the first hour, and now he made himself read past it into the entry beneath the long human note that some archivist dead for centuries had left for anyone who ever came asking. Sede read it. The way you read a thing you already know will hurt. The humans, the note said, did not keep these ships against a war. They kept them against forgetting. A watch was not a threat you made to an enemy. It was a promise you made to your own dead, that what they had built would still be standing, still ready, still awake, underneath its stillness, on the day someone finally came to test whether the promise had gone soft. The field had not woken because it was attacked. The field had woken because for the first time in 300 years, someone had come to Sable Reach and treated a promise like a corpse. Setai lowered the file. His hands had gone cold. He understood finally and completely what the humans meant by watch, and understanding it, he understood also that the word he had spent his life writing over ships like these, the word deed, had never once been true. He looked up at 206 waiting lights and past them at the largest hull of all the one they had shot and taught and could not kill, and the Steadfast, which had not moved in 300 years, began very slowly to turn. For 300 years, the largest hull in the boneyard had held one position against the turning of the galaxy, and now, in front of 6,000 ships, it moved. It was not fast. That was what broke them. A fast thing you can fear cleanly the way you fear a falling rock. The Steadfast turned the way. A continent turned slow and total and utterly without doubt, its long gray flank swinging around until the wound they had opened, and it had healed, was no longer facing them, until the blunt forward mass of it was pointed at the flagship, like a word being finished. On the command deck, Fleet Master Kavan Vale opened his mouth to say the line. It hasn't moved in 300 years. He had said it to first speaker on. He had said it to his deck officers. He had said it to himself in the dark of his own quarters when the lights would not stop coming on. The words were the wall he lived behind, and he reached for them now, the way a drowning man reaches for a rope. He could not say them. The rope was gone. The ship had moved, and the wall he had built out of its stillness came down all at once, all 300 years of it, and left Cavan Vale standing on his command deck, with nothing between himself and the truth. It moved, he said instead. It came out very quietly. It was the most honest thing he had said since Meridian burnt. Behind him, Sentinel Keeper Oru Setai had stopped counting. He noticed it the way you notice. You have stopped breathing. The record in front of him held a running total. 1 and 9 and 40 and 206. A careful ladder of numbers he had climbed all the way up, because counting was the one thing his hands knew to do when he was afraid. And now his hands had simply come off the count and lay still on the console, because past a certain point, a number stops being information, and becomes only a way of not looking at the thing itself. The field was waking faster than he could name it. Not 200 now, not a number he could set down and steady himself against. All across Sable Reach, the boneyard was coming up, hull after hull after hull lights, running out into the dark in every direction, until there was no edge to them, until the graveyard he had catalogued as dead. For the whole of his working, life stood revealed as what it had always quietly been, a fleet, awake, and waiting to be told where to point. Keeper Vale said, "The count. Give me the count." Setai looked at his still hands. "There isn't one fleet master," he said. "There is no count anymore. You do not count the tide when it comes in. You only get to higher ground, and there is no higher ground here." He turned from the console. "I stopped writing because the numbers stopped meaning anything. That is what they wanted us to understand. Not how many. That there is no how many. That there was never going to be a how many." In the quiet room, light years and a lifetime away, an old man and a younger woman watched the same waking and did not raise their voices. "That's the fleet," up Nadia Cole said. She did not sound proud. She sounded like someone reaching the top of a long stair. 206 was to make them think. This is the rest of the answer. How many are showing now? Hart asked, though. He knew she would not give him a number, and she did not. "Enough," Nadia said. "More than they can hold in their heads." Which was the point. She keyed the old channel. Her voice went out across the dark to 6,000 frightened ships. And it was not loud, and it was not cruel, and it was somehow worse for both. Dravel command. "You wanted to know how many ships we have. Look at the field and understand that we stopped counting them a long time ago, the same way you did. The difference is that you stopped because you thought they were dead. We stopped because it stopped mattering." She let that sit. Then gently, almost the way you would speak to someone who had hurt themselves through their own foolishness and was only now feeling it. "You have one more choice to make today. Make it carefully. It is the last one you get." On the command deck, Cavan Vale stood in the light of a fleet he had called a graveyard in front of the whole armada that had watched him laugh and understood that every shot he had fired had only been a lesson, and every lesson had been learned. And the thing that had been asked to wait 300 years had finished waiting. He thought of the woman on the station, Amara Reyes. He had not known her name when he gave the order. He knew it now because the humans had spoken it once on the channel, plainly without heat, the way you name a debt. He understood too late that Meridian had not been a soft target near the boneyard. Meridian had been the promise, and he had treated the promise like a corpse. "Fleetmaster." Seta's voice was almost kind. Now the terrible kindness of a man who has stopped being afraid because he has arrived at the far side of fear. "They are not going to fire first. Do you understand what that means? They have us. They have had us since the first light came on, and they are waiting for you to decide whether they have to." Vale looked at the steadfast, at the healed flank, at the slow, certain mass of it, pointed at his deck, like the end of a sentence he had been writing himself since the moment he first laughed. 6,000 ships waited on his word. The whole galaxy, it would later be said, was watching Sable Reach that day, watching the dead warship. The aliens had mocked, waiting to see what it would do now that humanity had brought it back to life. And Cavan Vale, fleetmaster of the Dravel Dominion, who had never in his life lost anything, opened a channel to a voice that had been dead when he was born and did not know yet whether he was about to ask for terms or for mercy, because he had just discovered they were the same thing, and that the humans had known it all along. The channel opened, and for a moment, Cavan Vale could not find a single word to put into it. He was a fleetmaster. He had accepted surrenders. He had never once, in a long and decorated life, been the one reaching across the dark with an open hand. The shape of it was so unfamiliar that his mouth would not make it, and into that silence, the human voice came again, and it did not gloat, and it did not press. It simply told him what was about to happen, the way you tell a child what the medicine will taste like. "Here is what you need to understand before you speak," Nadia Cole said. "We can end the Dominion today, not the fleet. The Dominion. Your capital is 4 jumps from this field, and there is nothing between it and us but the distance, and distance has never been our problem." A pause. I want you to sit with the fact that we could, so that you understand what it means that we are not going. Somewhere behind Vale, an officer made a small broken sound. Sci-Fi did not turn to see who. The humans moved then, and it was almost worse than a broadside, because there was no violence in it at all. The nearest 100 ships of the Woken fleet slid forward through the dark and took up positions around the Dominion Armada, not firing, not crowding, simply being where they now were. And every Dravel commander understood in the same instant that they had been surrounded by a thing they had been shooting at an hour ago and could not scratch. Your weapons first, Nadia said. Not your ships, not your crews. Your capacity to do to anyone else what you did to Meridian. That is the only thing we are here to take. And they took it, precisely patiently, one system at a time. The Woken fleet reached into the Dominion Armada and unmade its ability to make war. Lance batteries went cold. Munitions were drawn off and rendered inert. The great yards behind the lines, the forges where the Dominion built its fleets, were reached across 4 jumps of distance by ships that should have been dust and were quietly and completely stilled, not burned, not razed, stilled the way. You take a weapon out of the hand of someone who has been hurting people with it, without breaking the hand. 6,000 ships sat in the dark, whole crewed alive, and utterly unable to harm a single living thing ever again. You are leaving us defenseless, Vale said. It was not a protest. It was a man trying to understand the shape of what was being done to him. We are leaving you harmless. The human voice corrected gently, those are not the same word, and the difference is the whole of it. A defenseless people. Someone comes for. A harmless one. No one needs to. We are giving you the second thing. It is more than you gave Amara Reyes. At her name, Vale flinched. Now the part you will not forget, Nadia said. Your crews. Every one of them. We are going to let them go home. The command deck went very still. There are Dravel commanders who would have kept them, she went on. And for the first time there was something under the calm, something old and worn smooth by use. Hostages, labor, a lesson written on living people. You did on Meridian. You have our people in your holds right now, and you took them to prove a fleet was dead. A breath. We are going to send yours back to their families with the ships they came in. And I want you to hear me say why, because you are going to repeat it for the rest of your life. And I want you to get it right. She said it slowly, so that the record would carry every word, so that the whole galaxy that was watching Sable Reach would carry it too. You chose to burn our archive. We chose to let your crews walk home. Do not ever let anyone tell you those were the same choice. No one on the flagship spoke. There was nothing to say to it. It was not a threat, and it was not forgiveness. It was a mirror, held up steady, and every Dravel on that deck saw their own faces in it and looked away. Sci-Fi found he had written the line into the record without deciding to. His hands had come back to life, at some point the way hands do, and had done the one thing they knew how to do, and had set the human words down in the permanent history of his people, where they could never now be taken out. He looked at what he had written, and did not want to erase it, and that wanting not to was the first clean thing he had felt since Meridian burned. Fleetmaster. The human voice again softer. Now the business nearly done. Your terms are these. Your weapons stay dead. Your crews go home. Our people come back to us. All of them starting with the historian. Your fleetmaster pulled out of Meridian alive. You will return Amara Reyes first, and you will do it carefully, because there is a 19-year-old girl waiting on a docking spar who has not moved from it in 3 days, and I would like her to have her mother back before nightfall. A pause. Do that, and no more of your people die today. Not one. That is the mercy. It is the only kind we deal in, and it is the only kind that was ever worth anything. Cavan Vale Fleetmaster of the Dravel Dominion stood in the light of 206, and then more, and then a number no one would ever write down, and gave the order to release his prisoners. Amara Reyes was the first to go. They handed her across unhurt, still holding absurdly a data slate she had refused to let go of through the whole ordeal, 30 years of a fleet's history that she had believed in when no one else would. And far away, on a docking spar, where a girl had waited 3 days without sleeping, an airlock cycled, and the mother came back through it, After all, the steadfast, its work not yet finished, but its point, long since made, held its slow position over the beaten armada. It had not fired a single shot. It had healed. One wound moved once, and spoken through a human voice. And with those three things it had ended. A war. The Dominion had started with 6,000 ships and a laugh. And Sentinel Keeper Oru Setai, watching the enemy dead, escort the enemy, living safely home, finally understood the whole of the sentence the humans had been speaking to his people from the first amber light, and reached to write its last word into the record. The word Setai, wrote, was over. And then he sat and watched his people learn what it had cost them. The negotiation, when it came, did not look like a negotiation. First speaker Talisan descended from the capital in person, which the Dominion had not done in living memory, because a first speaker did not travel to the defeated. A first speaker summoned them, but there was no summoning left in Talisan now. He came out to Sable Reach in a small, unarmed vessel, past the Woken fleet, under 206 lights and more. And he came aboard the flagship with the careful steps of an old man who has understood something late, and is trying not to show how much it weighs. They spoke to him through the steadfast, not from it exactly. The human voice came from the old gray hull, but everyone understood by now that the ship was only the mouth, and the mind behind it sat in a quiet room somewhere, with a cup of coffee gone cold. It was Admiral Elias Hart who spoke for the humans in the end, and his voice was the same flat, unhurried thing it had been from the first hour. And Talisan, who had ruled 1,000 worlds, found he could not raise his own above it. "You will want to talk about the future," Hart said. "Guarantees, borders, what we will do to you, and what you must do for us. I am going to disappoint you. There is almost nothing to negotiate. Your weapons are dead, and they stay dead. Your crews are already going home. Our people are coming back to us. That is the whole treaty. Everything else is just you and me finding out whether you have learned anything, and if we rebuild on," said. It was not defiance. It was an old man testing the walls of the room he now lived in. "If in 100 years we forge new fleets, then we will be here," Hart said. "That is the part you never understood. So let me say it once plainly, and then we can both stop pretending it is complicated." He paused, and when he went on, it had the shape of something carved. A species that keeps its dead ships is not grieving. It is waiting. You looked at that field for 300 years and saw a graveyard, because your people bury a thing and walk away and never look back. We do not bury. We keep watch. Everything we have ever built that mattered is still out there in the dark somewhere, still ready, waiting for someone to come and find out whether we meant it. You came and found out. That is all that happened here. Talisan was quiet for a long time. "You could have destroyed us," he said at last. "Yes. You still can. Yes. Then why the ship's home? Why the archivist first? Why the first speaker searched for the human word and found it distasteful in his mouth. The mercy. It buys you nothing. We are beaten, either way." And here, Hart did something the Dominion did not expect. He did not answer with strength. He answered with the small true thing, the way the humans always did the thing, that turned out to be harder than any fleet. "Because the point was never to win," he said. "We had already won when the first light came on, and you and I both know it. The point was, what kind of thing we would be having won. You get to find out what kind of thing you are by what you do to the people you have beaten. We found out a long time ago. Today you found out too. I do not think you like the answer. Most people don't." Far away on the wreck of Meridian Station, Amara Reyes came home to nothing. They had rebuilt what they could in 3 days, which was not much. The archive she had spent 30 years assembling was gone. The physical part of it, the shelves, and the slates, and the slow accumulation of a life's belief, all of it scattered, or burned, or drifting somewhere in the dark, that the Dominion had made of her station. She walked through the ruin of it slowly, and no one spoke to her, because there was nothing to say to a woman standing in the ashes of the thing she had given her life to. Her daughter walked beside her. Ren had not slept, and would not for a while yet, and held her mother's arm, the way you hold something you have already lost once, and do not intend to lose again. They found the desk near the end. It had survived more or less, the way single stupid things survive a disaster, while everything that mattered burns. It stood at an angle in the wreckage, scorched its surface, swept bare by the decompression that had taken everything else. Amara stood in front of it and looked at the empty, scorched top of it. 30 years of work reduced to this one bare surface, and something in her that had held all the way through capture and imprisonment and the long silence of not knowing whether she would see her daughter again finally, quietly, began to give. And then she saw the pen. It had rolled into the well of the desk and lodged there. And so it had not been swept out into the dark with everything else. An old thing, a pen, she had carried up from Earth 30 years ago, refilled 100 times the pen she used to say, had written more of human history than she had. It was scratched, and it was ordinary, and it was in the whole burned ruin of Meridian Station, the one thing left of the archive she had built. Amara Reyes picked up the pen. She did not weep, though her daughter did quietly, watching her. She turned the pen over in her fingers the way she had 10,000 times, and then she reached out, and on the bare, scorched surface of the surviving desk, she wrote. There was nothing to write on, so she wrote on the desk itself, in the film of ash, the first line of the archive she would build again. It was a date and a name, and 4 words after it. The name was the Steadfast. The 4 words were, the watch was kept. We start over, she said. Her voice was steady. It was the same steadiness the whole galaxy had heard from every human that day. And here at last was where it came from, an ordinary woman, with an old pen, deciding in the ruin of everything to begin again. That's all keeping watch has ever meant, Ren. You lose it all, and you write the first line back down, and you keep it anyway. Nobody was ever coming to do it for us. On the flagship, Sentinel Keeper Oru Setai heard the archivist's 4 words read back across the channel and understood that he was one of them now, a keeper, and that his people had spent 300 years mocking the only other keepers in the galaxy without ever once recognizing their own reflection. He looked at the record in front of him. His whole life's work was in there. The long catalog of dead things, ship after ship after ship, marked with the word he had used without thinking. Dead, dead, dead. Dead all the way back to the beginning of his career. He understood now that not one of those entries had been true. Somewhere out in the dark, every fleet he had ever written off was still keeping its own watch, still waiting, and he had walked past all of it with a clerk's certainty and called the waiting a death. He did the only thing a keeper can do when he has been wrong his whole life. He began entry by entry to change the word. It would take him years. He did not care. It was, he thought, the first honest work he had ever done. First Speaker Taliesin prepared to leave. He had his treaty, which was barely a treaty, 4 sentences, and a mirror. He paused at the airlock. An old man carrying a weight he would carry now until he died. And he asked the one question the Dominion had come here, asking the question that had started all of it. The question he could not leave without an answer to. How many more, On said. Ships like these. Fields like this one. If we had gone anywhere else, done this, anywhere else in your space, how many more of them are out there waiting? The human voice, when it answered, was not cruel. It was almost gentle. It was Nadia Cole. This time, the captain of the ship they had shot and taught and could not kill. And she gave the first speaker of the Dravel Dominion the same flat answer. Her grandmother had written into the watch log a century before either of them was born. We stopped counting, she said. A long time ago, the same as you did. A pause, unhurried, kind and terrible at once. The difference is that you stopped counting your fleets because you were sure they were dead. We stopped counting ours because it stopped mattering whether anyone was ever coming. We kept the watch either way. Another pause. You wanted a number, so you could decide whether we were worth fearing. There isn't one. There was never going to be one. That was always the answer to your question. You just didn't like it enough to hear it. The first 300 times, we said it. Taliesin stood in the airlock for a moment longer. Then he bowed his head, which no first speaker had done to anyone in the memory of his people, and he went home to a capital that would be safe forever now, and defenseless, never because the humans had chosen the harder mercy and left harmless instead. Behind him on the command deck, Fleetmaster Cavan Vale watched the small, unarmed vessel of his ruler slide away past 206 lights and more, and said very quietly to no one. The line he had built his whole certainty on one. Last time, it hasn't moved in 300 years, he said. And Sentinel Keeper Oru Setai, without looking up from the record where he was patiently changing the word deed to the word watch. One entry at a time, answered him at last. No, Fleet Master, he said. It waited 300 years. There was never anything the same about those two things. We only wished there was. The Steadfast went home the way it had done everything else that day, slowly, and without being asked twice. There was no ceremony to it. The war was over, and wars that end in the afternoon do not get songs the way. Wars that end at dawn do. The great gray hull came about one last time, turning its heeled flank back toward the empty dark of Sable Reach, and it slid back into the field it had kept for 300 years, and would keep for 300 more. Around it, one by one, the other ships settled back into their old positions, each finding again the exact spot it had held since before Nadia Cole's grandmother was born. And as each one settled, its running light went out. Setai watched them go dark from the flagship. And this time he counted again, because there is a kind of counting that is grief, and a kind that is prayer. And he had finally learned the difference. 206 lights, then 190, then a slow dwindling. As the fleet lay back down hull after hull, returning to the stillness, his people had mistaken for death, until the great field of amber shrank back to a scattering, and then to a handful, and then to almost nothing at all. Not because the ships were failing, because the watch was set again, and a watch does not need every lamp lit. It only needs one. In the quiet operations, room light years, and a lifetime away, Captain Nadia Cole set down her coffee cup for the last time, and opened the watch log. It was an old thing, the log older than the ship, a running record kept by hand across more generations than she liked to think about. Her grandmother's writing was in it, her grandmother's grandmother's further back, the ink gone brown. Every keeper who had ever sat this watch had written into it, not reports, not orders, just the small human fact of the thing, that on such a day the watch was kept, that the fleet was ready, that no one had come. Page after page of no one had come, a whole history of nothing happening, which is the only history a watch ever wants to write. Nadia found the current page. She picked up the pen, a plain one, nothing carried from Earth, just a pen. She wrote the date. She wrote the name of the field. And then in the same 4 words, the archivist had scratched into the ash of her burned station, because it was the only sentence that had ever mattered. Nadia Cole wrote the watch was kept. She looked at it a moment. Then she added one line more, because this had not been a day of nothing happening, and the keepers who came after her would want to know. They came. We let them go home. She closed the log. She rinsed her cup in the small sink in the corner because she was the last one in the room, and someone had to, and she turned off the light, and she went to find something to eat. An ordinary woman at the end of an ordinary shift that had happened by chance to be the day a war ended. Tomorrow she would sit the watch again. Nothing would come. She would write that down too, and it would be the truest thing she wrote all year. That is where these stories are supposed to end, and it is worth saying why plainly. For anyone who has drifted close to sleep and might miss it, the Dominion had expected the humans to be terrible in victory, because the Dominion knew what it would have done, and a people always expects its enemy to be a mirror. But the humans went back to their coffee. They rinsed the cup. They wrote 4 dull words in an old book and turned off the light. And it was this in the end, more than the woken fleet, more than the healed hull, more than any number they refused to give, that the Drevel could not get out from under. You can arm yourself against a monster. There is no defense at all against a people who beat you, and then simply go home to dinner. On the flagship, Sentinel Keeper Oru Setai finished his shift too. He had been changing the word all day entry by entry deed to watch, working backward through the catalog of his whole career, and he had not made much of a dent in it, because a life's work of being wrong is not undone in an afternoon. He did not mind. He had years. He closed the record for the night, at the same place he always did, and he found that his hands, for the first time in longer than he could remember, were perfectly still. He was not counting anything. There was nothing left to be afraid of. The worst thing had happened, and the worst thing had turned out to be the truth. and a keeper can live with the truth better than with almost anything else. Fleetmaster Cavan Vale came and stood beside him at the blister before he left the deck. The two of them looked out at Sable Reach together at the field, going dark at the last few lights winking out as the fleet lay back down to wait. "They will tell it wrong," Vale said. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the length of the day. "At home, they will say we were ambushed. They will say the fleet was a trick, a weapon we could not have known about. They will make it something that could not have been helped." "Yes," Setai said. "They will. It could have been helped." Vale did not look away from the darkening field. "You told me it was lit. The first hour, you told me one of them was lit, and I called it a short, and I said the line." He was quiet a moment. "I am going to hear that line for the rest of my life." Setai did not offer him any comfort because there was none to offer that would have been true, and the humans had taught him that day. The difference between the two, he only stood with the Fleetmaster and watched the last lights go until there was almost nothing left of the great woken fleet. But the memory of it and the certainty settled now into both of them, like a cold that never fully leaves, that it was still there. The very last light did not go out. Setai watched for it at the end half, expecting the field to go fully dark to return completely to the corpse. It had pretended to be for 3 centuries. It did not. Out at the heart of Sable Reach, on the largest hull of all, on the ship they had shot and taught and could not kill, a single amber running light stayed lit. One point of warmth in all that cold gray, no brighter than a candle across a hall. It was the same light that had been the first to come on. Setai was almost sure of it. It had waited 300 years in the dark, and it had woken to end a war in an afternoon. And now it settled back down to wait again. And it left one lamp burning, so that anyone who ever came to Sable Reach in this century, or in some century, long after every name in this story was dust, would know. At a glance, the thing the Dominion had paid 6,000 ships to learn. The watch was still kept. Somewhere behind that single patient light, the ship that had been asked to wait went quietly back to waiting, and did not mind, because waiting was the whole of what it was for. And far away, an ordinary woman washed out a coffee cup and turned off a light of her own, and went home, having written 4 true words in an old book ready to come back in the morning, and if nothing came, write them again,